So in the last video, we covered what the cloud was and kind of how it came to be and what some of the technology behind it looks like. And today I wanted to walk you through a specific cloud provider that we'll be using for the examples in this study, which is Linode. And Linode, I've used Linode for a long time. They're actually introduced to me many years ago by a client of mine, and I have just fallen in love with them because they are the interface is very straightforward to use. Their customer service is very responsive, and the machines that they give you are very fast, and the price is hard to beat. So they've always been great. Some other cloud providers have been, kind of keeping up with them, but with Linode, I've always kind of gotten the best bang for the buck at every point along the line. So I've always liked Linode. You will find that a lot of the different cloud providers, you'll find things that are similar, but I found that Linode gives not only the best bang for the buck, but also the most power for the most simple user interface. So it's just everything is straightforward to use. It does what it looks like it's going to do, and there's few surprises. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to walk you through this, kind of see what it looks like to create machines on the cloud. So, if you need a new server, so you start off, you have to create a login, and you have to, I believe you still have to put in a credit card for access, because they want to make sure that they can bill you for the time that you use. But I mean, even you could probably do most of what's in the book for just a couple of dollars. It does not cost a lot to run these machines, especially if you're not going to run them for a long time. So, because they actually prorate these things by the hour, so they're actually super cheap. So you have a dashboard, and the dashboard has, you can see you've got Linodes, and those are our machines, our virtual machines. And then you have volumes, and that is if you have extra disk drives that you want to create. I don't use these very often, but there's definitely uses for them. Then you have node balancers, and that is for, we'll get into scalability, which is the ability to increase your performance just by adding on extra machines, and you'll use node balancers to add more and more machines to your website, and the node balancers kind of coordinate them all. And then domains are used for registering domains, and we won't really use that in this study, but those are kind of the main areas of the dashboard. So if we wanted to create a new machine, we just hit the create button there, and it will ask you what you want to create. And so what we want to create is we want to create a server. So we want to create a Linode. So we'll click on this button. And so this will give us this screen. And so it asks us, Linode is based on Linux, so all these are Linux machines. And I don't know if you have much experience with Linux, but we'll go over a lot of the details on how to use it. Linux is Linux is a very popular option for server operating systems for a variety of reasons. One is that it's built, pretty much all the pieces are optional, so you can turn off anything that you're not using, and so they become very fast because they're not doing anything that you don't need them to do. They're also very straightforward. They're built by people who are developers for developers. So it becomes pretty easy and straightforward to make changes and to do the things that you need to do, because the people who built it are a lot like you and know your kinds of needs. And so also the other thing is that it's actually meant. Linux is based off of Unix, which originated in a remote connection environment. So these things are actually built for remote connections. They're built for the fact that you have your own personal space here, and you have a server somewhere far off, and you have to access it remotely. Prettier operating systems like Mac and Windows are not, they're not really built for that. They're built for being directly on the console. Now you can, it's not that you can't remote into Windows and you can't remote into Mac. It just takes a lot more bandwidth. Not every program is built for it, but with Linux, it's really built for doing that from the ground up. So Linux, if you're not familiar with, has a bunch of different distributions. These are basically different compilations of software that run on top of the Linux kernel. The kernel is just the tiny part of the operating system that manages the hardware, manages the processes, manages the memory. But there's, within any operating system, you have all sorts of programs that are running. You have programs that manage, the networking. You have programs that manage the firewall. You have programs that manage the security infrastructure. You have programs. And so all those programs are combined together into an operating system. And within Linux, they're called distributions. And the distribution we're going to go with is CentOS 7. And there's a variety of reasons for hitting 7. First of all, 8 just came out. And so most of the tutorials you're going to find are based on CentOS 7. And also, not every cloud provider has gotten their CentOS 8 in place. So CentOS 7's been around for a little while. It's going to be around for a lot longer. So it's a pretty safe choice. There's a lot of documentation on any issues you have with it. So I really recommend going with CentOS 7. So region. So you can boot servers in pretty much any place you want. I typically just choose Dallas, Texas, because it's kind of in the middle of the country. But if you're somewhere else, you might want to have servers closer to where you are or to where your customers are. If you have a large European segment, you might launch servers in Germany. So anyway, we'll choose Dallas, Texas, because that's my stomping grounds. So then you choose how big you want your machine. Okay, and so they have these different categories of machines, and so Linode is what we're going to choose because it's the smallest plan, and this is just for playing around, so we don't really need much out of it. But they're standard plans, so you can see they usually name them based on how much memory they have available. So a Linode 2 gigabyte plan is a machine that has 2 gigabytes of RAM and 1 CPU and 50 gigs of storage. And we really won't care too much about storage. If you have an application that needs storage, you'll probably want to get your storage from elsewhere, either by adding on volumes to your machine or by using some other sort of storage service. So you really you use the storage mostly for applications that need to run, temporary files, and databases. Not really for you'd rarely store uploaded files and images in your storage. You usually use some sort of an external storage for that. But nonetheless, some people choose to do it differently. If you have a small site, it might be easier if you have one server, it might be easier just to load it all into your local storage and run with that. So to each his own. You can see the Linode 2 gigabyte plan, that is 1.5 cents per hour. So that does not cost you very much at all. You can boot this up, run it for an hour, turn it off, and that will cost you 1.5 cents. So it's $10 a month, and you can go all the way up. The Big Daddy Linode 192 gigabytes has 192 gigabytes of RAM and gives you 32 processors. And that will cost you $1.44 an hour. So if you can imagine, if you have something that takes a lot of horsepower, but you don't need it that long, it really doesn't cost that much to run one of these guys. Now, if you had to run it for a long time, yeah, that starts to cost. Just for short bursts, let's say that you knew that your system was going to be on some major news program. Well, maybe you'd want to bump it up to a 32 gigabyte machine for a day or two take the traffic and then bump it back down. So that's we'll go over how to do that, but it's pretty straightforward. If you're so the standard ones are kind of a mix of memory and CPU. The dedicated CPU kind of focuses on having more CPUs over RAM, and the high memory is the other way around. It has high RAM as opposed to CPUs. So it just depends on your workload and what you're needing. And finally, we won't do anything like this, but if you have, so GPUs are for certain programs make special use of a graphics processing unit, and so if that's you, these guys have special graphics processors that can be used for more than just graphics. They can be used for computation type things. So we're going to go with the Linode, and notice the Linode is less than a cent per hour. So we're going to choose this guy, and then we need to give it a label, which is basically its name, and so we'll call it simple server. And then we can add a tag, and the tags are just if you have 100 servers, you might group them. These are my web servers, these are my database servers. So you can add tags to help you sort and group your different servers. And then you give it a password. This password is what you'll use to log in remotely. So I put in a password, and that's going to be its password when it boots up. So then SSH keys. This is kind of an advanced login method. We won't cover that now, maybe later, but it allows you to have a single key that you can log into multiple systems where you don't have to memorize a password, but it will recognize your personal device. And then you can add in backups or private IP addresses, and we'll talk about private IPs later. But backups, who doesn't need things back up? So we'll back up our system. It only costs $2 a month. We'll hit create. And it is now working on building and booting our machine. And so as soon as it says booting, I can hit launch console, and that will show me the screen of my computer. And so right now, the machine isn't all the way turned on yet, so it doesn't give us much information. Now, as I said, this is a kind of an old school green screen type computer, so this is not going to be anything fancy. This is just going to be it's all going to be text based. So this guy's going to boot us up, and this is the boot up system. So you can see the machine booting, and now it's all the way booted up and ready for us to log in. Now to log in, your username is always going to be root. That's the admin login username on Linux. And the password is going to be whatever it is that you typed in for the password. And there you are. You're now in the machine. Now we'll do a tour of Linux machines later, but I wanted to kind of just show you that that it's real easy to get in, get a machine up, and get started. So let's say that, so we can close this, but let's say that we decide that this machine is not big enough for us. So what we can do, here is this page tells us about our machine. So first of all, this is our IP address of our machine, 45.56.74.147, and if you're trying to hack into it, hey, guess what? I've already discarded the machine by the time this video is finished. And this is our IPv6 address. Okay, so this is IPv4 address, IPv6 address. This is the most recent things that have been going on. And these are just some graphs about usage. So volume says if we have any additional hard drives that we've created for this, which we have not. Networking tells us how to access our machine. It gives us our IP addresses. And then there's some more advanced IP management things we can do. We can transfer and share IP addresses. Resize, if we decide that our machine is too small or too big, we can resize our machine to a different size. If we need to rescue, we can boot into rescue mode. I've never really had to do this, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. Rebuild, we can have it reinstall the operating system if we need to. Usually, I rarely rebuild. I usually just create a new one from scratch if I need to. Backups, this will be our latest backups. We can actually take a backup right now. This Linode allows for one. It'll continue to maintain a daily, a weekly, and a monthly backup. But you can also manually take a backup and give it a name. So we'll just do one right now. Test snapshot. Hit take snapshot, and it's going to make sure that we're sure. We'll say yes, and so that's going to start a backup process. So now the machine runs just like normal while the backup's going. And this will be a pretty fast one because it's a small machine and there's not much running on it. So what's really cool about snapshots is that in addition to being a backup that you can rebuild your machine from, you can also build new machines from your backup. So if you want to create a template machine, you can create a template, make a backup, and then create a whole series of machines based off of that backup. And you can also down here, you can choose when your automatic backups happen. So if there's a particularly busy time of day, you don't want to be taking backups during that time. But you can say, hey, look, from 2 to 4 in the morning, let's see here, this is in Greenwich Mean Time, so probably want it more like, I think I'm more like this. And then I can choose a day of the week for my my weeklies. And so let's say I have a slow day Wednesday. So Wednesday in the middle of the night, that's when I want my backups to happen. So anyway, our snapshot is almost done. And give it a little bit of time here. Or maybe we'll go on to something else and come back to the snapshot. So activity, this is just a list of things that you've done with the machine when you've booted it, when you've rebooted it. It's telling us that that our snapshot's being created. So then under settings, we have our basics. You have what it's called. We can change the root password. We can set our notification settings. So this will say, hey, look, notify us if our CPU gets pegged really hot, really heavily, or email us if our disk usage just spikes way up. So you can have these different notifications, and then this guy will watch and make sure that your machine doesn't get turned off when you don't want it to. So for example, if there was some sort of an error and the machine went off, this guy will automatically initiate a reboot. So it basically gets you back up running fast if something happens unexpected. And then here's where you actually would go if you want to delete your Linode. So it looks like our backup's done. So we'll go back to our backup. And you can see here, I have our snapshot with our name, when it was created. It took 2 minutes to make, and it takes 1.5 gigs to store. So I can restore this to an existing Linode, or I can deploy it to a new Linode. And we'll do a lot of that later on as we go through. And so finally, in the Advanced tab, it tells us information about our configuration and our disks. And we can also migrate Linodes across data centers if we need to, but that's kind of an advanced operation. So let's go and say, what would we do if we wanted to resize this Linode? Well, we just go to the Resize tab. And so right now we're on a nanode, but let's say we want to bump it up to a 4 GB plan. We just click on the plan you want. I would generally, if you think you might drop it back down a size, I would not resize the disk. But if you're pretty certain you're going to stay at the new size, then resizing the disk is recommended. Then you hit submit, and Linode will turn that machine off. They'll transfer it to a new machine of the right size, and then turn it back on. It's going to keep its IP address, keep all its settings. The only difference that you'll be able to tell is that it's bigger. Let's see here. Okay, it says our Linode will soon be automatically powered off, migrated, and restored to its previous state. So there it goes. So it's resizing, and that'll take a little while. So we'll fast forward you through this process, and I mean it's usually just a couple minutes. But you probably don't want to just sit here and stare at it resizing. All right, now that it's done resizing, it's now going to boot up, and we will now have a new machine that has that's a bigger size. You can see it booting up right there. And we can log in with our same username and password because that is the exact same machine that we had before. And we can validate. If you don't know Unix commands, if you type in the word free, it will tell you how much RAM you have, and it says we have a total of total of 4 gigs of RAM, which is what we signed up for. So that's a Linode 4 GB. So as you can see, it's pretty simple just to say, hey, I need a bigger server, and it will create you your bigger server. And you can see our IP address has not changed. None of the configuration has changed. It just automatically moved it to another server, and with it took 3 minutes and 39 seconds. So with 4 minutes of downtime, we're able to get up and running in a brand new server. And so, you know, if you had to be down for 4 minutes in the middle of the night to get ready for some big event the next day, very easy to do. So, all right, as we'll go along, we'll show ways that you can expand your capability without having any downtime. But it's just good to know that even with the simplest configuration, if you need more firepower, all you have to do is ask it to resize. So you can actually delete this. You can get rid of the whole thing just by going to our list of Linodes. You can see now we've got this machine in our list. We can click here. We can power it off. Now if it's powered off, it still costs you money. It's just not actively running. But we can just say, hey, let's delete it. We're all done. Click delete. Are you sure you want to delete it? It results in permanent data loss. We say, yes, delete it. And so it's now gone. So anyway, so that's the Linode interface, and kind of how to create machines and get access to them. We'll go in the next video. We'll go a little bit more in depth into how to use Linux and some of the basics of the command line, and how to find your way around there. So until the next lesson, I'll see you soon.